Introducing Future Back Drinking, a new podcast series from PepsiCo and Time. Each week, PepsiCo's Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer, Dr. Athena Kenyura, hosts conversations with industry pioneers to illuminate the technologies and trends that will redefine our tomorrow. Hear from top-tier visionaries as they uncover the challenges, opportunities, and wow moments in today's fast-paced world. Future Back Drinking isn't just a podcast. It's a journey through the now into the next, served with a twist. Join Dr. Kenyura for an exploration of what our future holds. Coming soon to all your favorite podcast platforms.
Less expected pathways for myself in my personal life, in my work life, across the board.
Charli XCX has been a pop icon for over a decade. From her breakout hits like I Love It and Boom Clap to her newer albums like How I'm Feeling Now and Crash, Charli XCX has always been at the cutting edge of pop and electronic music. Along the way, her music has underscored some of the most iconic TV shows and films of our era, from Girls in the 2010s to Bottoms and Barbie in 2023. And through it all, she just wants her music to help people have fun. Now, Charli has a new album, Brat, out June 7th. And in this conversation, we dove into her love-hate relationship with 90s pop, how TikTok has changed the music industry, and why sometimes the best songs are written in 30 minutes or less. I'm Charlotte Alter, senior correspondent for Time, and this is Person of the Week. So I'm kind of curious, when you were growing up in the 90s, who was your favorite pop star? Who was your favorite Spice Girl? Were you Team Britney or Team Christina? What was your pop iconography?
Well, yeah, when I was growing up, I was definitely on like a diet of the Spice Girls and Britney. And then a lot of kind of UK pop music that I'm not sure whether it made it over here, like Steps and Hearsay and S Club 7. Like, I was a real top 10 pop girl.
I loved S Club 7 too.
Oh, so cool. I was in their fan club, which was awesome. But yeah, so that was kind of what I was about. And it's interesting. Now I listen back to some of that music and I actually really find it very difficult to listen to the music because I actually don't find it audibly pleasing. Like,
interesting.
The production choices for a lot of those songs are so indicative of the time. Things that I would really not gravitate towards at all now. Like very like organic sounds put through an extremely classic pop template. Live piano, like bongos, a lot of production choices that I wouldn't necessarily make. But I think when I was growing up, it wasn't really about the music, actually, that made me gravitate towards those artists. It was sort of about the fantasy, and with the Spice Girls, it was about like the camaraderie between 5 women. With Britney, she's an anomaly in this statement. I love a lot of her music from back then, still now. But with Britney, it was about this kind of like teen dream American fantasy girl next door. Like, she was the polar opposite of who I was. So there was a level of escapism through like watching her blossom,
Right. So did you have a favorite Spice Girl?
Yeah, I really loved Baby Spice. I think, again, she was the polar opposite of me. Basically, when I was younger, my life dream was to be blonde.
Really?
That was like the
Why?
aspiration. I'm half Indian. I always felt very much like a kind of outsider in my very sort of like white school. I think I just wanted to feel like all the other blonde white girls. So my dream was to be blonde and be called Claire. That's like really what I wanted. I mean, Charlotte is not even an Indian name at all, but I felt like being blonde and being called Claire would eliminate a lot of like bullying and a lot of just me feeling like I was sort of on the outside looking in. So I think that's why in ways I gravitated so much towards Baby Spice, because she was the polar opposite of who I was, like super girly, wearing pink, blonde,
Right. So you got your start as a tween posting on MySpace. Why do you think MySpace at that time was such a powerful creative outlet for you?
Well, I think it was all I knew. It's funny, I think looking at kids now who are like 13, 14, I feel like they know so much more about the music industry than I did when I was 13 or 14. I just feel like there's so much more information that is very easily accessible and available. And, there's people talking on TikTok about like how to reach out to record labels or how to be an independent artist or, all of this stuff. That wasn't really happening when I was younger. Like you had the concept of like making a demo tape and sending it to labels. But really, it was either you're kind of like playing shows in clubs and pubs and whatever, or you had a MySpace. I mean, maybe there were other options, but I wasn't really aware of them. And so, yeah, I think MySpace was just easy because for me, it was like at my fingertips. I was young when I first got my MySpace and started putting music online. So I wasn't at that point in time really able to like travel on my own and play shows. I didn't live in London. I lived in the countryside. So MySpace was good because I could be, a pop star from my bedroom, basically.
Right. So how did you get initiated into the underground rave scene in London? From being a kid, in the outskirts, as you just said, making music from your bedroom.
Yeah, I mean, it was through MySpace. I basically would get these messages from people in London who were throwing parties. And I guess I was posting a lot. I was following certain people, but I wasn't really aware of like the rave scene or the party scene in London, to be honest. There was this magazine called Super Super Magazine, which was a very kind of like collage-esque, I suppose, like new rave magazine. And I was really obsessed with it. I think they only made like 12 issues or something. But I was very aware of that magazine and I was kind of following that magazine. And I think some of the people who were throwing parties were very connected to that magazine and maybe that's how they found me. But they just sent me a message and they were like, hey, do you want to come and play at one of our shows? And I was like, yeah. So I told my parents and luckily they were super supportive and they were like, yeah, sure, let's go. We'll drive you, which obviously I was like horrified about because when you're like 14, you just want to go everywhere without your parents and like be cool.
Right. But was that kind of a condition of you going? They're like, we're all going.
Totally. Yeah. And we went at like 9 p.m. thinking I'd be on at like 9:30, having no concept of like a rave. And so we got there and like no one was there. And I was like, oh my God, I've been set up. This is a nightmare. But then we basically hung out until like 3 a.m. when I played and my parents waited with me and they were so cool. I mean, I think my dad was like kind of living through me a little bit and my mum was a bit more like on edge. But yeah, it was cool.
Wow.
And so that was kind of how it began, like through those messages on MySpace.
Yeah. So you had your first huge hit as a featured artist on Hyperpop's I Love It in 2012, which was a huge song. It was everywhere. And in an interview from around that time, you said that you wrote the lyrics and vocals to that song in 30 minutes, which is wild. So how did you do that? And also, how does that compare to your writing process now?
Yeah, I find the best songs, for me personally, are always written quickly. My recent song, Speed Drive, that was another one that was done in like 30 minutes.
Wow.
Boom Clap was quite fast. So I Love It came about. I was in Sweden on a writing trip and I'd not been there before. And I was working with this guy, Patrick Berger, who I'd never met before. But I was a little bit like socially anxious. Like I didn't really want to go and like meet him. Like I was just, I guess on that day, I was just feeling a little bit apprehensive. So I said to him, hey, can you send me some beats and I will work on them in my hotel room. And maybe then the next day I'll come in and we can, go through what I've done. So he sent me 2 tracks. One was a very early demo of I Love It, like just the track, which sounded completely different. It was actually very ABBA feeling, Sweden classic. And then another track that I can't remember at all. And I basically spent half an hour on I Love It. And I was like, this is bad. And so then I spent probably 5 hours on the other track. And then I went the next day to the studio with Patrick and he was like, oh my God, this one song that you sent is incredible. And I was like, yeah, the one I spent ages on, right? And he was like, no, I love it. So that's how it came about.
So just a couple years later, Rolling Stone named your 2014 album Sucker the best pop record that year.
Oh.
So that's been 10 years since Sucker came out. How do you look back on that album?
I think it's not my favorite record, to be honest. And I feel bad saying it because, obviously there are a lot of fans who do love that record. And it's always a bummer when artists are like, I hate that album, and I don't hate it. Like that album provided me with so much information about myself and my process. And there were also like really great moments whilst I was doing it. I mean, like there were a couple of songs on that record that were hugely successful and I cared about that at the time. So that was like a win for me. I feel like, there are things I would have done better had I just kind of known what I know now or something. Like when I listened to Sour, Olivia Rodrigo's record, I'm like, damn, like I wish Sucker had been more like Sour.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I just think she did such a good job of making that kind of like angsty teenage, like rock adjacent genre really cool and palatable and fun, but still cool.
Right.
Whereas I feel like with Sucker, I did that in moments, but I also like missed the mark in moments, I think. So I think that's why I don't fully love that record. There are just things I would have done differently, but I think that's the same for a lot of people with a lot of records. But there are songs on that record I really love. Like I really love this song called Need Your Love. I really love this song called Doing It. So yeah, it's just, with time you realize, oh, I could have maybe finessed that a little bit.
Right. So you had a real shift in your sound and aesthetic after Sucker, in large part because you embraced hyperpop, which was at that time an emerging genre. Can you explain for our listeners who aren't totally familiar with this, what does hyperpop sound like? What is hyperpop? And what drew you to it?
I have never been drawn to hyperpop. I'm not really into genres at all. But yeah, I guess to me, the way I would define it is I think it's a genre that came out of like the pandemic with kids being able to be in their bedroom and simultaneously be very on the internet and kind of like ingest this bedroom production inspired by layers of the internet and people like myself, Sophie, Drain Gang, 100 Gex, and amalgamating a lot of the sounds that all of those people were creating, but then kind of like churning it out into this new thing. Like that's what I personally see hyperpop as, but I'm not an expert.
Right.
And the reason I say I'm not an expert is like people get so defensive about that genre, but the thing is I don't really know or care. And definitely when Sophie and myself made the Vroom Vroom EP in, I think, 2016, if I'm correct, or 2015, can't remember. We had no clue what hyperpop was. We were just kind of making stuff that we felt really inspired by. And the reason that I gravitated towards Sophie so much was because I think she was making this music that I had really been trying to make when I was back on MySpace producing my own beats and stuff. Like I was really inspired by a lot of French electro music and club music, but I just didn't have the tools to really like create what was in my brain. And then I heard a Sophie song, I think it was Lemonade, on SoundCloud, and an ex-boyfriend of mine had played it to me, and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. I kind of managed to reach out to her through a publisher that I was working with at the time. And I was kind of like, would you be down to like get together? And she was like, yeah. And so I was going back to Sweden, where I did a lot of my writing during that time, to kind of write in this like old countryside house with a load of Swedish friends of mine. And I invited Sophie along, not really thinking that she would come. And I hadn't really heard much from her, but then suddenly like she showed up in the middle of the night. And I was like, oh my God, you're here. And then we basically like locked into this like basement room and we made the whole EP. And it kind of blew my mind because I felt like she was speaking this language that I'd been trying to speak for ages, but I couldn't. And so, yeah, we kind of like started like walking this new path together, and it was just so inspiring.
So speaking of Sophie, she was such a pioneering producer and clearly had such an influence on your work, and she died suddenly and tragically in 2021. What do you think music lost with her passing?
I mean, for me, so much, because I truly think that she is one of a kind, and not even just in the kind of music that she was creating and the sounds that she designed, but like just her take on artistry, the way that she presented herself as an artist, I think is really quite rare in this day and age. I think the main thing is that actually music gained so much from having Sophie, because I think she influenced a huge amount of young, intelligent electronic producers and artists. I think wouldn't really be where they are right now without her. We've gained so much from her and will continue to do so.
More with the one and only Charli XCX when we come back. So, obviously, you've been making work now for such a long time. How do you approach reinvention as an artist? Do you think that you're in the process right now of reinventing yourself?
Kind of. It's interesting. I think it just happens naturally. I think artists are like reptiles. You just kind of like shed your skin. Well, for me at least, I don't feel the need to consciously be like, okay, like another album's coming, I got to do something drastically different. I find that I just step into it naturally, and I think that's the sign of like a true artist. It's like you kind of just go there. You go fearlessly, or sometimes with fear, with the kind of direction that you're being pulled in, and you find yourself within it, you know. And for me, often I work in contrasts, I've noticed, you know, like if one record is very underground and electronic and abstract, the next record is probably going to be like super pop and very much more structured, and the imagery will be much more elaborate and polished, whereas maybe the previous thing was very like DIY. That's the only sort of thing I can predict with my work, really, is that like if one thing is one way, the next thing will be the polar opposite.
So your new album, Brat, comes out on June 7th. Where does Brat fit into this back and forth that you're describing?
Well, the previous record I made was called Crash. And that was me really kind of experimenting with the concept of selling out, I suppose. It was my last album on a 5-album major label deal. And I'd never really actually utilized the record label in a very classically pop way. And so I decided that I wanted to do that for this record. I wanted to use an A&R for the first time. I wanted to work with outside songwriters and have them pitch songs to me. I wanted to play this like almost now archaic pop fantasy, this like highly sexualized, big hair, choreography doing, song pitched, singing version of a pop star. And so doing that, I think the pendulum swung the complete opposite direction as I was beginning to create Brat. And I think I ended up in this very kind of like scrappy conversational place with the music. I was thinking about being extremely direct, extremely on the nose, particularly lyrically. You know, I think I was like really gravitating towards saying exactly what I meant, because I think my previous record had been shrouded in so much kind of concept and like, oh, it's the sellout record because da 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 da. This one, I just wanted it to be like, this is what I think and I'm going to say it. And I'm not going to say it in metaphor or in a kind of pretty like floral kind of image. I'm just going to say it how I would say it to my friends over a text or whatever, you know? So there's a directness that's very kind of like brutal and almost aggressive with this record.
Yeah. And, you know, this album also seems like it's a return to your party music roots in some way.
Yeah.
And your first event for this record was in February in New York, where you hosted this record-breaking Boiler Room DJ set. Do you think that the club is having a comeback?
I do, yeah. It's interesting because I think I was reading some stats about like, you know, club culture in the UK being kind of like at the lowest point that it has been in a while because of, you know, the cost of living crisis. It's like people can't really like afford to go to the club. But I think it's also kind of spawning a lot of underground spaces, which I think is really cool. And I think really is amazing because it gives smaller artists and DJs and creators like a space to really flourish. So I think in ways people are becoming extremely creative again and thrifty. And I think that always goes hand in hand with great art. And so I think in ways it is having a comeback, yes. And especially like club music, I think, dance music, I think is beginning to take on a different life, which is really exciting and really cool to me because it's kind of the only genre of music that really makes me feel like alive, you know?
Yeah. Well, so before we move on, I want to ask you one more question about this because COVID was a weird time for nightlife because some nightlife totally shut down, but then there was also this underground scene that was kind of, you know, going strong even while lots of other things were shut down. I'm curious what that period was like for you as somebody who really thrives on live events. And, you know, as you were just saying, party music and parties and sort of nightlife in general is so essential to your work. So how did you grapple with that during COVID?
Well, I made a record called How I'm Feeling Now, and I decided to make it in 5 weeks very publicly with my fans. And I kind of think that's how I dealt with it. And the record itself was, in ways, kind of a club record, but it was sort of a lot of the lyrical content was about fantasizing about being able to go to the club, to the party, whatever, and kind of finding your own escapism in your sort of like internet existence. And, you know, of course, it was unfortunate to not really be able to go into those spaces IRL, but it was also really fun to be able to create like the kind of online version of these spaces with my fans. Like we did a lot of like Zoom parties. There was this great online party called Club Quarantine where people would kind of come on Zoom and do DJ sets. Again, it's like people got creative, and I think that was kind of inspiring to witness.
So on that note, your lead single, Von Dutch, was all over TikTok. I'm curious how you see your relationship with the internet and your fans and stan culture, because some artists really embrace it and some artists are more kind of like making their music in a vacuum. I'm curious where you are on that spectrum.
It's interesting because I definitely make my music in a vacuum. Apart from that one album I was just discussing, How I'm Feeling Now, I don't really look for feedback within the fan base, and I don't really sort of pay attention to the outside noise of the fans whilst I'm creating. I think I am an artist who, the internet is extremely important to me and my fan base, and we grew up on it together and have witnessed the world change via the internet together, and also the way in which we engage with culture, music, and specifically pop stars, So for me, the internet and stan culture is really important because I'm more actually interested in the way that the internet digests pop music than actually pop music itself. Like, I'm interested in looking at it through that lens. For me, it's never just about the music, it's about the entire world that the artist exists in. It's about the way that they build their dialogue, the way that they build their language, and music is a part of that, but so is their persona. I think persona is really interesting to me. And I don't think that in this day and age you can really have persona without at least a little bit of thinking about how the internet interacts with that. Even if you've decided to not be on the internet, that's still a choice that affects the way that people discuss you or view you on the internet. And so it's all really important. It's all super interlinked to me, even though I create my music kind of off the grid.
Yeah. Well, on that note, you've been in the public eye for over a decade now. What have you learned about how fame works? And what were you trying to say about fame with this record?
Well, I mean, fame's funny. It's interesting. It's a game. I think some people play it better than others. I think it's nice to care about it, but also really take everything with a little pinch of salt, which is why I really respect somebody like Julia Fox, who totally knows the fame game, knows how to work it, is really, really intelligent, but also isn't lying. And she's also very honest about the game. And I really respect that. I really respect that because I think it's interesting. It's more interesting than, pretending like you don't really know what's going on and the mechanics of, arranging to get your photograph taken, for example. It's like everybody does it, but no one wants to just say it. And to me, it's more funny if you just say it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And my whole approach to life is a little bit eye-rolly. I'm a bit like, oh, come on, guys. But I also can really play into it sometimes.
So, like we discussed at the beginning of the interview, you came up on MySpace, but now TikTok is the medium through which people really discover a lot of music. Yeah. So I'm curious what you think TikTok is doing to the music industry, and how does this difference in platform change the type of music that people are encountering?
Right. Okay. Really interesting question. It's so tricky because I love TikTok. And I love, in ways, what it's doing for the music industry and creation. But obviously, we don't really get paid. So there is that element. But I've just succumbed to the fact that my music being used, streamed, created with online is not going to generate me financial income. I've just sort of succumbed to the fact that it's 2024, maybe that's just not where we're at. And I really respect all the people who campaign to try and get a better deal for everybody. That's awesome. Respect it. But maybe this is really naive of me. I just think TikTok's a really creative place for young people. I love when my song gets mashed up with another song. I love when people take my vocals and create a new sound and I'm not thinking about my paycheck when that's happening. I'm just thinking about it's cool, the fact that lots more people are getting to know my music via these interesting sounds that are happening on the platform.
Charli, it's been so fun talking to you about how you're shaping the world of pop music. But now I want to take a second to get to know a little bit more about what shapes you in a segment we like to call The Last Time. So, when's the last time you threw a house party?
Probably my birthday, although that doesn't feel right. Christmas. Yeah.
When's the last time you sent a group text?
Oh, like about 5 minutes before jumping on this call with you.
When's the last time you had a new idea for a music video?
Probably yesterday. They come hard and fast.
When's the last time you met one of your idols?
At Coachella, weekend 1, I met Mel C from the Spice Girls.
Oh my God,
she ran up to
one
me
of
and
the
she was
Spice
like,
Girls?
Yeah, she ran up to me and she was like, Charli. I was like, oh my God, Melanie C. Yeah,
wow.
Cool.
Oh my gosh. Okay, when's the last time you tried on a wedding dress?
I haven't ever.
For some reason, I thought you were engaged, but maybe you haven't started that process yet.
I am. I'm just probably not going to start that process until like the month before.
You know what? Smart.
I feel very lucky that like in this industry, you're often doing fittings for very important things like 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah.
So I feel like I do have experience in doing quite like high stakes outfits, like very last minute.
Wow. Well, thank you, Charli, so much. It's been so great to talk with you. I really appreciate you making time to be here with us. And I love your new record, and I've been a huge fan of your music for a really long time. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Charli's new album, Brat, comes out June 7th. Thank you so much for listening to Person of the Week. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd love to hear from you. So send your tips or thoughts on our show to personoftheweek@time.com. I'm Charlotte Alter. See you next week.
Person of the Week is hosted by Charlotte Alter. It's produced by Nina Bisbano and Allison Bailey. Our senior producer is Ursula Summer. Our story editor is Katie Feather. This episode was mixed by Joe Plord. Our theme music was composed by Billy Libby. Joseph Frischmuth is our fact checker. Person of the Week is a co-production of Time Studios and Sugar 23. At Time, our executive producers are Dave O'Connor, Michael Erlinger, and Sam Jacobs. At Sugar 23, our executive producers are Mike Mayer, Michael Sugar, and Liam Billingham. Sasha Matthias is the head of audio at Time. You can find us online at time.com/personoftheweek and wherever you get your podcasts.